name is Alice Grossman. I'm going to be talking today about textual data uses at federal agencies and really any sort of institution, especially larger institutions and public institutions. This is work that I did while I was a American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow, Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow, working at NOAA for the last year. I am now a researcher at Texas Transportation Institute, and I am following up on that research that I worked on while with NOAA and AAAS. So the main point of the work that we were doing there was to look at what some of the best practices and potential challenges were at different federal agencies that have implemented textual data management systems to help inform NOAA moving forward with their own textual data production, management, analysis, and really thinking about how we can use those data assets to do enterprise level analyses and portfolio analysis at these agencies. So we talked to people within NOAA first and foremost about sort of what we had done so far, what the needs were, and where we were going with thinking about textual data at this agency level, and particularly for the application of portfolio analysis. And then we talked to people at other federal agencies that had already stood up platforms and systems that were able to take in those textual data that the agencies had and help them figure out ways to do data management and do analyses on top of them using various tools and methods, and then come out with some useful outputs that is really transferable across agencies and across different types of institutions. So we specifically talked to the NSF, NIH, and the ARPA-E program at the Department of Energy, all of which have very mature and robust textual data analysis, portfolio analysis systems. So our main question kind of to start out is, why do we need to be using this? How do we make the argument to everybody within an institution and beyond, including decision makers and people who are prioritizing what sorts of programs and funding we should be doing, sort of why is textual data important? A lot of scientists especially are very used to working with quantitative data, maybe a little bit less with qualitative data. And then as we're able to move forward with various analyses like natural language processing, that can be sort of a mix between that qualitative and quantitative data output, what's the real purpose? And so the big picture questions that we really think textual data can help us move forward in terms of answering are thinking about what those big picture goals are, and that can be institutionally or agency wide, or looking specifically at one program or one portfolio within different program areas, and also looking at what the impacts are of various interventions. So if we have a goal we've set and we want to know sort of how close are we getting to that? Where are we in terms of reaching success, however we want to define that? And if we're making changes along the way, is that helping us reach those goals better or not? And these are things that we can do through textual data analysis as long as we have our data well managed and available to be able to do those analyses on top of them. So then it gets into sort of the how. Okay, we have the why. And working with this team at NOAA, we found a really good opportunity to get some interdisciplinary and inter-office collaboration here. I was working with people who were in the social science sphere. I was working with some computer scientists, economists, Office of Science Support, and all of these offices and all of these people had the need to be able to utilize the textual data available either inside their office and also generally outside of their office, coming from other areas of the agency, maybe external to NOAA completely as well. And so how do we pull together these different expertise, different skills, different methods with the textual data to be able to get this comprehensive enterprise and portfolio analysis? And it really is being able to bring all of these things together at once that can give you that holistic view and a holistic analysis in the end. So the next question is, what are they used for? How do we use these textual data? And so, in terms of talking both within NOAA, who I was working with, and then also talking to the staff and former staff at the Department of Energy, at NIH, and at NSF, we came up with what some of these key uses for the textual data systems are. And this really gets back to the why, but digs down into what are the actual application of thinking about goals that we're working for. So, especially at federal agencies these days, but also at a lot of academic institutions, and even some private and nonprofit companies, a lot of these goals listed here ring true in a transferable way. And so, one of the main things that we heard when talking to other people who have already developed these systems is that being able to organize and access textual data assets, just as well as maybe other terms of quantitative data, really allows the development of a narrative around different types of funding. So, if we're trying to start up a new program or show where our successes have been, there's a lot of ways to get that quantitative data, show some charts, show those statistics that we like doing to tell stories. But without having the text around that, you really just have numbers and charts. And so to be able to develop these narratives is a really important use of the textual data systems. And you can then do that combination of quantitative and qualitative analysis to back up your decision makings and help prioritize future decisions, which is really, really important and can help you get a better sense of where the successes are and how to continue them. Some of the other key uses included just from a purely legal perspective. If you're getting, public information requests, being able to efficiently respond to those requests for information, having those data organized to begin with, makes it incredibly easy and much more efficient for staff to be able to respond to those requests in an efficient and timely manner. It can also be really helpful in identifying research gaps or white space. What research has and hasn't been done? Where are the needs? If we have our textual data in terms of the papers, the reports, the web pages all organized, then we can really identify where those gaps are. Because if we do a search and we don't find it, we know, oh, it's just that's, you know, in a box under a shelf somewhere, or no, we have everything accounted for here and we're not finding it. And that means we have a research need that we need to fill. Can also be used in bibliometric analysis, and this is something that a lot of agencies, including NOAA, are doing incredibly well, is bringing together bibliometric information and making that data in terms of textual data searchable and machine readable, and be able to do all sorts of bibliometric analysis, which can tie into questions around diversity and inclusion, although that can also be in terms of staffing, in terms of student trajectories, and workforce development, and all sorts of areas. And a lot of institutions these days are talking about diversity and inclusion. And if we don't have that information readily available, it's a lot harder to assess and to improve in terms of what we're doing. Um, so once we sort of went through and identified sort of why we were doing this and what we needed, we started thinking about textual data in terms of what those key considerations are after talking to people at various agencies, and what the best practices and the challenges associated with each of those key considerations are. So that's what I'm going to go through right now. And we're going to start at the very beginning, which is just an initial system development. How do we make sure that the textual data that we're producing, in terms of anytime we write a white paper, anytime we have an internal technical memo, anytime we have a publication, etc., we're producing textual data. And so, how do we make sure that we're setting up a system where we have the most efficient use of grabbing that data right from production, having an asset management system for those types of data, and then being able to access it and analyze it with the chosen tools moving forward? And so the key opportunities here are really finding a champion from the very beginning, and building up that staff capacity, both from the bottom and all the way up to the top. And so it's communicating in advance this is the system we're trying to build, this is why we're trying to do it, and here's the benefits that we're all going to reap if we can do this correctly from the beginning. And then being able to build that system up can be really helpful and reduce having to go back and get that buy-in and maybe convert more data later on. Obviously, it's not easy to start big systems, especially at big institutions, and there will always be resistance to change. There will always be limited resources, and figuring out how to prioritize these efforts is going to be a challenge no matter what. Um, Next, we started thinking about workforce implications. And so this is both, the workforce capacity that you have, where do you find those strengths? And then also, how do you build up what you need? And that could either be staffing up or finding people in various places in an institution or agency who can contribute and have the knowledge and skills that you need. And you can bring them in and have that support that you need, especially at the beginning, if you don't quite have the resources built up yet to hire up a whole bunch of new people. And we saw this work differently at different agencies. So when we spoke, for example, to the National Science Foundation at NSF, they had a very much of a bottom up approach. And so there were a few staff members who really realized that the capabilities for portfolio analysis and building those narratives from a textual data asset management system were huge. And it was really sort of working from the bottom up, building a system, getting that buy-in early on, and then gradually building up to the point that today they have very robust internal and external systems and tools to do analysis on top of that that they use across the agency. Whereas we saw very differently, for example, at the National Institute of Health, that was a much more top down and started with funding that came in from Congress and an ability to staff up. They have a whole team. I think it's around 30 or more staff members now working on their portfolio analysis system, keeping all of that textual data asset management together and performing the analysis on top of it. So we saw this work in different ways and successful in both. And it's just figuring out which way works best in different contexts and situations. So when we're talking about data science, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, thinking about things like privacy and security are incredibly important, as well as the ethics and data and AI ethics behind that. I think these are very related topics. And thinking about, what are those internal versus external access points that you want, and the security that you need, and maintaining that privacy that's required and the security that's required. But also, as I mentioned earlier, one of the uh, key applications for this is things like public access to various types of information in the form of text. And so also making sure that what can be publicly available is publicly available and is searchable and is really as accessible to the public as possible. Um, and this is thinking about, again, going back to that initial system development, building it from the from the bottom up, keeping these considerations in mind is going to help you create a better system and less work moving forward with maintenance as you go. And then the last consideration that I want to cover is that, again, anytime you're making more information public and accessible, and whether that really is to the general public or just to more stakeholders within a certain group or agency or institution, you're going to get scrutiny behind that. And if you're a federal agency or a state school or a private institution, it's thinking about what that potential scrutiny might be, and making sure that you're mitigating any limitations and biases in the data that you're presenting, and also that you're explaining the limitations and biases in the data that you're presenting. Whether that be quantitative or qualitative data, we know that there's always going to be some sort of limitations. And so making sure that that is communicated clearly is a key step to making sure that increased access comes with the responsibility associated with it. So overall, I think there were a number of lessons learned, both from our own experience building up and then talking to these other agencies that have built robust portfolio analysis systems using textual data assets. And that's thinking about really starting off by communicating with stakeholders and engaging them. That's both external and internal, talking to people about what these lessons learned are and documenting it. One of the interesting things that we found is that despite a number of agencies and institutions having built up portfolio analysis systems based on textual data assets and analysis, there's not a lot of documentation. And that can be really helpful for all of us as a data science community to be able to learn from each other moving forward and not be starting from scratch every time. And then doing an internal assessment. Where are your data? What can they be used for? What questions is your institution interested in answering and discussing, and leaving that door open, obviously, for changing priorities moving forward. And then it's really going back to, again, that agency buy-in and workforce capacity, and thinking about where those needs are and how you can plan for them for the future. I want to especially thank my co-authors at NOAA, Dr. Gina Esco, Mickey Olson, Joe Conran, and Dr. Laura Newcomb, and everybody at NIH, NSF, and DOE that spoke with us as well. So thank you to ADSA also for this opportunity and all of the great presentations this year.